We're privileged to invite to the pulpit Beth Kidd, who is the founder and the executive director of Place of Promise in Lowell, Massachusetts. It's a multi-service advocacy and discipleship nurturing center working with sometimes the homeless, with those that might have HIV/AIDS, drug addiction issues, and other issues. And so Beth is the founder and the director. We're really glad to have her come. Beth started Place of Promise in 1992 as a subsidiary of Emmanuel Gospel Center, where Beth lived and worked as a missionary nurse in the inner city of Boston for 22 years. Her deepest desire is to know God more each day through an intimate love relationship with Him. She longs to be a good and faithful servant, demonstrating God's love to the most broken and lost people who God brings into her journey. And Beth and her husband Jeff have been married for 43 years. They have 4 grown children and 6 grandchildren, and she's mothered and grandmothered countless more. And I'm excited to have her here for a number of reasons. First of all, through the missions team we've sponsored, we've contributed to this ministry. Those of you that know Wendy Ludwig, who's our former director of youth ministries, is now on staff at Place of Promise, and Wendy was really sad that she wasn't going to be here today when Beth was speaking. And also, we're doing our stewardship campaign, the theme of which, changing lives together. And if there's one thing that Place of Promise does, it changes lives. And so we're just delighted to have you, Beth, and welcome.
Thank you, and good morning to you all, and I give all the honor to God. I have to tell you that I'm a little bit on the nervous side this morning, and I was thinking about this pastor who told me once that he was very nervous speaking for the very first time in a church that had called him to be their pastor, and he preached his first sermon, and at the end of the sermon was standing at the exit, shaking everybody's hand, and everybody was telling him what a great sermon it was, and he was giving all the credit to God. And finally this little old man passed by and shook his hand, and he said, "That was a pretty good sermon." And he said, "Well, I give God all the credit." And he said, "I didn't say it was that good." I'm going to give the credit to God anyway. That way, if it's not so good, you can blame Him. We're going to talk about today, who are we? Who are we? And I want to present to you today that there's 4 categories of people that I think that we can fit ourselves into. The first being the delusioned, those of us who live deluded by life. The second category is the consumer, those of us who spend our lives taking what we can to satisfy ourselves. The third category is the cheater. The cheater tries to give a little and get a little, all really designed to get what they can. So I give a little to get a little bit more back. And the fourth category is the true disciple of Jesus, the one whose center is God. Most of you know that there is this opiate crisis in our state, in our land, in our lives. I would venture to say today that it's not an opiate crisis. That's just a symptom of a deeper problem. The problem in our society, in our cities, in our state, in our land, in our world, I believe, is that we all have a center in our lives. And that center is thirsting for God, for all that God is and all that God can be to us. However, because of sin, and because the sin of ourselves, the sins of our fathers and our grandfathers and all those who came before us, and the sin of others in our lives now who sin against us, our center is still thirsting. Our centers don't know how to be filled. And very few of us ever get to the place where God is the center of our lives. And some of us live deluded lives where we believe that we can find something to fill that center ourselves. We thirst to fill that center, and so we fill it with power, and we become dominating, controlling people. We fill it with money, and we seek after wealth. We fill it with seeking after love and approval of others instead of really knowing agape love, the love of God, which is a choice, not an emotion. It's a choice to choose what's best every day, what's best according to God, what's best for me, what's best for God, and what's best for my neighbor. Love God with all my heart, soul, mind, and body. Love my neighbor as I love myself. Choose what's best. And so we delude ourselves into thinking that something else will satisfy that thirst. Maybe it's family. It might be a good thing. Families are good, but they don't satisfy that thirst. And that's why our families are falling apart. And maybe we're the ones that are the consumers. I spend my life like an infant, looking for whatever I need to satisfy me. And I stay self-centered my entire life. I take and I take and I take, trying to satisfy that center thirst. Does it work? Absolutely not. I end up with just me in that center, and I can't satisfy my own thirst. I'm not God. And then I'm the cheater. The cheater is the one who says, okay, you know what? I will invite God to be part of my life. I will invite God to be in my life. However, the concentric circles of my life, I put God in one of those circles, but definitely not the center. Something else remains my center, and I don't give my all to God. And I end up being a cheater. I have other gods in my center. And God won't dwell in my center with other gods. And we all know what the other gods can be. And then we finally have the disciple, the one who says, I long and I thirst for the living God. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, we read about Joshua, who had walked with the children of Israel all through the desert for 40 years. He was a slave in Egypt. He was delivered out of Egypt by the Almighty God, but they knew nothing of who God was. And they thirsted for God, but had filled it with other things. And whatever kept them captive had become their center. You know, if you're captive to alcohol, it becomes your center, and it dictates all your choices. If you're captive by a relationship, that relationship dictates all your choices. Does it not? It makes all your decisions. Whoever is in your center defines who you are and dictates your choices. And so Joshua is at the end of the 40 years, and all the adults who came out of slavery have died off. And now the children have grown up. And he says to this band of children who are now adults, it's time for you to choose today. Do you want life and prosperity, or do you want death and destruction? Now, how do you make that choice? You choose life by choosing to make God your one and only center. And he will be all that you need him to be. He will be your center. He will be the love of your life. He will satisfy you with love that goes beyond anything you can imagine. He will help you to be all you can be because he is your center. And he will help you make every choice that's according to his will and not yours. He will orchestrate your lives according to his plan, his agenda, and not yours. And he will make everything, even the bad stuff, work for good for those of us who love him and have him in our center. That's our choice today. Now, God chose the children of Israel, correct? Those people that he was speaking to, he chose. And then it was their job to choose him. He gives us that choice. He chose us when he sent Jesus to die in our place, when he paid the price to ransom us back, to redeem us back from the enemy. We belong to the enemy, and our souls are thirsting for God, and we don't even know it. And we look for whatever we can find to fill it and to quench that thirst. But when Jesus came, he said, I come that you might have life. I am the living water. He who comes to me will never thirst again. It's our choice. He chose us. Every one of us in here was chosen by God. But we need to choose to make him our center. Do we choose to make him our center today? Do we choose to make him our all? And Jesus says in Luke chapter 14 that means we leave father, mother, brother, sister as our center. Now the scripture says we hate our mother, father, sister, even ourselves, even life itself. The word hate there is translated as separate from. Take it out of the center. Our mother can't be our center. She can't define who we are. She can't dictate all our life decisions. But God can. If I want to live life to my fullest, if I want to be a true disciple of Jesus, he demands my all. He has to be the center. Then my relationship with myself, with others, becomes my relationship through him. My choices are made through his love. And I'm responding to his love every minute of every day as I walk with him as the center of my life. There's a story about Desert Pete. Desert Pete was a guy who was lost in the desert, thirsting for water. Came upon a rusty old pump and poured his water into the pump and primed that pump and pumped like crazy and got the water that he needed, filled up the bottle again, and dug a hole next to the pump and buried the bottle of water under the sand. And he put a note on the pump, and the note said, "There's a bottle of water underneath the sand. Dig it out and pour the whole bottle of water into the pump. And then pump like crazy, and you'll have all the water you need. Then refill the bottle and put it back under the sand for the next traveler that comes by who's thirsting." And so, you and I, we're crawling through life, thirsting. We come upon the pump, the rusty pump, and we see over on the side this wonderful illusion, this wonderful oasis with the palm tree and the water around it, right there in the desert for us. And we can choose to be the deluded. We can choose to believe that that oasis will satisfy my thirst much better than that rusty old pump. And so I crawl over to that water in that palm tree and I throw the water in my face, but the water turns out to be hot sand. And I wind up more thirsty than I ever was before. Or I can choose to be the consumer and I can say, there's the pump, and I read that note, and I dig down under the sand, and I find that bottle of water, and being the consumer that I am, what do? I drink the bottle of water, and I quench my thirst. But then what do? I'm still thirsty. I keep going a little bit farther, and I haven't filled my own canteens. I haven't filled my own jars with water because all I had was what I took. And I'm still thirsty. Or I can be the cheater. And I can say, okay, this looks good. I'm going to pour half the bottle in the pump, and I'll drink the other half, just in case old Desert Pete doesn't know what he's talking about. And so I'll halfway do it. I'll partially give myself to this pump. And we can be the cheater. And they pump like crazy, and they pump like crazy. But they're worse off in some ways than the consumer, because I thought I gave something to God. I thought I put God in my life. I have residents all the time that say, well, now I have God in my life. No, God has to be my life. God has to be the center of everything in my life. And then I can pump like crazy. And all the water I need to fill up every jar I have to make the rest of the journey through that desert into that promised land is there in full supply. And I can fill up that bottle and put it back under, and every stranger that I meet on my journey that's still thirsting, I can say, go to the pump, pour that water in, and pump like crazy, and you will find living water that will last you forever. Who are we today? Are we the deluded? Still chasing after what we think will quench our thirst for approval, our thirst for a pain-free life, our thirst for feeling good, our thirst for being powerful, our thirst for being wealthy? Are we the deluded? Or are we the consumer? Let me take what I feel I'm entitled to. Take. And guess what? I'm as empty and thirsty as I ever was. Or am I the cheater? Yeah, I'll come to church on Sundays. I'll even do a little this, do a little that. But when it comes to my decisions, when it comes to who I'm in relationship with, when it comes to what I'm doing with my life, where I'm going with my life, how I'm living my life, what I'm thinking about, what I'm listening to, what I'm watching, that's mine. I got that, God. Or am I a disciple, a true disciple, not just a fan, not just a groupie, but a true disciple of Jesus with God in my center? Back in 1972, my family was called, Jeff and I were called by God to come to Boston. When I was 11 years old, I learned that God chose me. And so I decided to make God my center. I chose him. And I said, I will do whatever you want me to do, God. I'll go wherever you want me to go. When I was 13, I went down to Philadelphia City Hospital and volunteered working down there as a nurse's assistant, and learned everything I could possibly learn about medicine and how it shouldn't be practiced. But I learned there that was a mission field for Jesus. And so I knew that God was calling me to urban missions. I went to the University of Delaware, got a degree in nursing, and married my husband and moved to Boston. And he was signed up to take the Inner City Ministries course at Gordon Conwell Seminary. And so we worked there and lived there, and we had to live in the inner city. So we moved into Roxbury. And my 5 years later gave birth to my first son. My mother showed up to take care of me for 5 days. All my family, all Jeff's family, was living in suburban Pennsylvania, nice houses, nice homes. My mother showed up to take care of me for 5 days. And the first night, it snowed, and the windows didn't fit in the frames of our house, the apartment that we lived in, and so the snow came in, and she woke up under a pile of snow. The second day, I was up nursing the baby at 2 o'clock in the morning, and somebody stole our car from in front of the house, and Jeff and the lady that lived downstairs went out and found the car, pushed it back, and of course my mother's watching out the window at all of this happening. The third night, it happened again. And the fourth day, somebody was walking by our house and threw a brick through the window where I had the crib, and my husband had to board up the window, and I had to move the crib. And the fifth day she was there, we were having a Bible study, and the police came banging at the door. She opened the door. They had their guns drawn. They came in and handcuffed one of the people in our Bible study and took them out at gunpoint. And my mother, hysterically crying by this point, with my baby boy in her arms, saying, "You can be as crazy as you want and live in this godforsaken neighborhood, but don't choose to raise my grandson here, please. Let me take my grandson out of this place. You two can be as crazy as you want to be, but let me take my grandson out of this place. This is no place to raise a child." We were reading the book of Joshua at the time, my husband and I, because we decided to name our son Joshua. And after my mother left, I was sitting on the sofa next to my husband with my baby in my lap, crying my heart out because I didn't know what to do. And we were reading Joshua, and Joshua says, "Be bold, be determined, be confident. As for me and my family, we will serve the Lord." And right there, sitting on that sofa, crying my heart out, we rededicated the center, not only of my life and of Jeff's life, but our marriage together was centered on God, and now our family would be centered on God. Who's your center today? I can tell you there's nothing like having a life centered on God. He can take the most ordinary little life, like he took mine, an ordinary little kid, 11 years old, in an ordinary little small town in Pennsylvania, where nobody knew who I was and made no difference in this world around me. And Adonai, the Master, became the center of my life, and he created a masterpiece out of my life. And today, I can stand here before you and tell you there are hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people who know Jesus Christ and who have found what quenches their thirst. Not because of me, but because Jesus became my center. Who are you today? Will you make Jesus your center today? Thank you.